So Glenn Greenwald apparently was in talks with people who were close to the Trump administration and directly involved in the Trump administration during the end of Trump's time in office. And he gives here what he calls the semi-inside story of Trump's refusal to pardon Snowden and Assange. So I want to go ahead and take a look at what his reading of the situation is based on semi-insider information, and then we'll come back and I'll respond.
CNN in December of 2020 saying as Trump lays pardon, GOP divided on whether Snowden should receive one. There were Republican senators aggressively demanding that Trump drop the intention to pardon Snowden and Assange. One of them, just as an example, was Lindsey Graham, who in December of 2020, so during the transition, tweeted, "To those urging a pardon of Edward Snowden, you are suggesting President Trump pardon a traitor. Edward Snowden is not a victim. Snowden has American blood on his hands and should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Now, that too was a lie, as I documented in that same video. Not one document that we published with Edward Snowden ever jeopardized a single individual. The same is true of Assange, but Lindsey Graham doesn't care. He'll just say that anyway. But this is what was going on inside the Republican caucus. In December, though, they really had no leverage, which is why he was getting closer and closer to pardoning Edward Snowden. And that's when, as you see here from U.S. News, on January 12th, 6 days after the January 6th riot, the headline, "On the eve of impeachment, some Republicans jump ship as Trump sinks." 3 Republicans so far have announced their support for impeaching President Donald Trump as the party considers a post-Trump era. They were making very clear to him, explicitly clear, Republican senators like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and Mitch McConnell, that if you do any of those things that you are considering doing, pardoning Assange and Snowden, declassifying JFK files, declassifying other secrets that should have been declassified long ago because they're from decades old treachery on the part of the US government, we will vote to impeach you. They had this leverage, this sword of Damocles hanging over his head. And I am not saying this to justify Trump's cowardly refusal to do what he should have done in pardoning Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. Candace Owen was right in that video that he should have, and that if she were in his position, he would have. She would have. I'm explaining what I know happened, which is that all signs were pointing in the direction of him pardoning Snowden for sure, and maybe Assange. And then suddenly this preposterous impeachment proceeding to impeach a president who was on his way out anyway emerged precisely because it gave them the leverage to threaten Trump and say that they would convict him if he did any of those things. And that is why he left office without doing what you can tell from that video he knows he should have done. He's very sheepish, very uncharacteristically timid about explaining why he didn't. "Oh, I was just too nice. I was just too nice. I'm known for being too nice." That wasn't the reason. The reason was because he was afraid of those Republican threats to convict him.
So there it is. That's what was going on behind the scenes. So do I buy that theory? Yeah, I do. I think there's another aspect to it as well, which is Trump is very likely to listen to the last person who was in the room talking to him in a similar way that George Bush would do the same thing. And I think he was mostly surrounded by people who were telling him, you can't do it. The guy's a traitor, Snowden and Assange. They're evil. They're undermining U.S. intelligence. They're helping our enemies. There's blood on their hands. They have this, this long list of arguments that are wholly untrue that come directly from the CIA and the Pentagon. And the people around Trump, he surrounded himself with neocon hawks. By the way, whose fault is that? It's his fault. John Bolton was in his administration for a long time. Granted, he was out by this point, but he had Mike Pompeo, who's just as bad as John Bolton, who bragged about lying and cheating and stealing while at the CIA. And when most of the people around Trump say something, he goes, "No, you're right. I think we'll go with that." I mean, same thing happened with all the times he huffed and he puffed and he said, "We're going to get out of Afghanistan." How many times did he go on Twitter and say, "We're pulling out of Afghanistan"? And then you found out soon thereafter, actually, no, we're not. And it's because you'd have generals walk in, as Trump would say, straight out of central casting, the pressed uniform and everything. And they'd be like, "Yeah, we're going to go ahead and not do that." And he'd be like, "You're right. No, we're going to go ahead and not do that." So He cucked himself to the deep state. And by the way, earlier on in that video, Glenn uses those exact same words, that Trump effectively is a cuck. So I think it's the fact that most of the people around him were telling him that, mixed with the fact that after January 6th, the Democrats were talking about impeachment, and you had the neocon hawks in the Senate who either said to Trump directly or said to him in a roundabout way, hey, listen, if you go ahead with pardoning or commuting these people that we're talking about here, well, then maybe I will join with the Democrats, and maybe we will impeach you. But look, the reason why that's extra non-excusable is because, as Glenn points out, Trump was on the way out anyway. Who cares if they impeach you? You're going gonzo, son. It's over. It's done. So, and that also might be further evidence that Trump is planning on running in 2024 too, is that he seemingly didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize, in the eyes of the establishment, a second run for him. So, I can't do the thing where I pardon these outsider anti-establishment heroes because then I'm no longer have whatever credibility I do have within the club of my own party's establishment. That's possible, if not likely. But I wouldn't doubt that you had the likes of a Marco Rubio and a Lindsey Graham, because Mitt Romney was already kind of on that page. There are other Republicans. Well, was Mitt Romney? No, Mitt Romney wasn't even in there at this point, I don't think. Was he? I don't remember. But there are some Republicans. There's a handful of Republicans, potentially enough to make the difference, who are like, yeah, look, we'd be in favor of impeachment if you dare do these things. So ultimately, what happened? It came down for Trump to the thing it always comes down to for him: self-preservation. And you could talk throughout his entire career, this is what's been the motivating factor for Donald Trump: self-preservation. How many times, like when his casinos or any of his businesses went bankrupt, he would always find a way to get away largely unscathed, while he would burn his workers like nobody's business. There were all those stories that came out in 2015 and 2016 when he was in the Republican primary. People who worked directly with Trump on his hotels, whether it was electricians or plumbers or whatever, they'd be like, the guy owes me $17,000 and he stiffed me. Just incredible detail about specific cases of this happening. Because again, it always comes down to him. It always comes down to self-preservation for him. And so he viewed this as a self-preservation type move. So he's like, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, forget it. I'm not going to pardon them. I'm not going to commute their sentences. Or I guess it wouldn't be a commutation because technically there are no sentences against them, but he could just pardon them and let them come back in the country and everything would be hunky-dory. Well, Snowden would want to come back in the country. Julian Assange isn't even American, but you get the point. So that's the semi-inside story right there. And Glenn even talks about the specific Republicans who actually agree with the libertarian right and the progressive left, who wanted these people to be pardoned. Namely, Matt Gaetz was one of them, and there were a handful of others. I think even, possibly even certain Trump kids. I don't know if it was Don, probably Don, not Eric or Ivanka, but there were some who were lobbying him, and it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, self-preservation won out. And they had the piece of leverage of impeachment. But the leverage shouldn't have meant Dickie McGee's axe to Trump anyway, because you already lost, dog. Get over it. Get over it. Get over it. Get over it. And by the way, that is one of those things. Funny enough, he actually totally miscalculated in this sense. If this is a guy who cares about narcissism and self-aggrandizement and building a legacy, that would have went down as one of the better things that he did. That would have been one of the things that, was talked about in decades as, well, Trump did do that thing, like Obama pardoning Chelsea Manning, for example. That's one of the best things he did. And we still talk about that in a positive sense. It would have been positive if Trump had done it for Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. And by the way, also, my theory was that, because Trump said to Candace Owens, I felt strongly more about one than the other, and he said, I won't tell you which. My theory was that he felt more strongly about Julian Assange, because Julian Assange in 2016 and WikiLeaks sort of inadvertently ended up helping Trump, because WikiLeaks released the DNC emails, which showed that Hillary Clinton sort of rigged the primary and the DNC sort of rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. And so since that politically helped Trump, I thought, well, he feels more strongly about Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. According to Glenn, with his sources who are close to the Trump administration, he says, Actually, no, it's the opposite. He felt more strongly about Snowden than he did about Assange. So what are potential reasons for that? I mean, my guess is the people who are around Trump, most of the voices in the room were more clear that they think Assange is the one who, whatever, has blood on his hands and all this stuff, which is not true, but he's probably told that over and over. And also, Assange, I don't think they curated the stuff that they released through WikiLeaks nearly as much as Snowden and Greenwald did. Now, I don't know if that's one of the granular details that Trump was told, but Greenwald and Snowden and Poitras, and this is when Greenwald was at The Guardian, they really went through all the information that they were going to release with a fine-tooth comb and basically redacted anything that they thought even theoretically might, harm American troops or whatever the hell. And apparently that's not the same process that Julian Assange used. Now, again, it really comes to naught anyway, because there was no harm done by Julian Assange releasing U.S. war crimes. That was a heroic thing to do. There was no harm done by any of the WikiLeaks leaks. But the narrative around it was, hey, the Snowden crew was more thoughtful and went through everything with a fine-tooth comb, and WikiLeaks was more of a bulk dump of information. So again, doesn't matter because nobody was harmed and they both are heroes, but that is one of the narratives around it. So maybe that was something that Trump was told and why he felt more strongly about Snowden than he did about Assange, according to Glenn and his inside sources. But there you have it. Self-preservation wins out for the pathological narcissist. Not too surprised. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.